Morning, Chris. How you doing this morning?
Hi, Ron. Doing awesome. How about yourself?
Doing great. Today's another great topic. Especially it's fresh on my mind. I just got back last week from the WSAA event down in California. It was great. I met a lot of great people. If you're watching the video, thanks for coming to the booth and meeting with me. If I missed you, hopefully you can schedule a demo, and I'd love to walk you through what we're doing. Today, we're actually going to talk about the level two, level three qualifications and B2B exchange rates, transaction rates, whatever you want to call it. So, Chris, this is more my field today, right? Normally we're in the
Right.
technical realm and it's really in your world. Today we're kind of in the payment space. So I'm going to ask you, why don't you take a swag at defining what are B2B wholesale rates and what does that even mean to people? Because we've lived in this B2B space now for, the entire 17 years we've been in business, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're going to have a lot more detail on this for sure, like you said. But just generally speaking, one of the things that's really advantageous about B2B is there's a lot more information that we can get about the purchaser that we're making a transaction with, and the seller. And so this makes it so that we can sort of, from a very macro level, reduce the risk of the transaction having to have, some kind of a void of the transaction or even fraudulent activity. And also depending on the business itself and how long the business has been around and credit worthiness and those kind of things, there can be a lower risk profile for the business, and different factors that funnel into that can make it so that the payment processor can determine, okay, we can offer a better rate. Also, just in general at scale with a lot of transactions, in large sales volume, it's possible to sort of commoditize the expenses associated with the account and operating the account. So we can offer a lower and lower rate as there are higher volumes of sales transactions. So I know there's a lot of detail to that, and you might have been cringing a little bit with some of those, Ron, but will you
No,
unpack
it
some
was
of
great.
those for everyone?
Yeah,
Okay.
no, yeah, no, it was perfect. It was great. And matter of fact, you kind of hit on one of the things. Again, I don't know everything. I haven't been around forever, but I think that a lot of reasons this even came about, this wholesale rate, is I think it was an incentive for the card issuers to lower their risk. I mean, when you think about B2B, it's not Ron going in and buying a, $700 Honda mower. This is the government of Kenya going and buying 17 $3 million combines from Japan and having them shipped overseas. And once they get shipped, if there's a fraudulent activity, how do you get them back, right? I mean, that's just almost a nightmare and almost an impossibility, right? And that's where escrow accounts and things to help set up trust and things to help lower that risk. And I think that's exactly how this all started, right? I think these bank issuers that had the cards are like, hey, listen, guys, when these business cards are used, when these B2B cards are used, they're usually used, like you already articulated very well, on these higher business transactions or on these multiple transactions where they're doing a lot bigger volume and bulk, right?
Hmm.
Now, the thing about businesses is normally when Ron goes and signs up on target.com, it's like an email, maybe a phone number, and a username and password. I mean, that's all the information they usually get. The rest of it's not required. And so if somebody were to ask Target, hey, do you know any more information about this Ron guy that bought from you on credit card? They would be like, nope, just got a username, password, and an email address, right? They don't have a lot of information. But when a business usually registers, especially when they're able to purchase on account sometimes, and when they have a relationship, usually the businesses have a much better understanding of the information, which is exactly what you described, right? So the nice thing about these transactions is they've come out and the issuer says, listen, when you send us a transaction, if it's a business card, we would like these other pieces of information. And there's usually, I think we just did one with TSYS, and it's about 22 pieces of information, right? They ask for a commodity code. They ask for the sales tax that's collected. They ask for the business entity, the types of products, the zip code that it was shipped from, the zip code that it shipped to. There's a whole bunch of different things that they ask about that individual transaction. And if we can provide that full list of information, and they have acceptable data, some data they're like, as long as you have at least a zero in there, we're fine. But we at least want to know that you attempted to find the data, whether it's available or not, right?
Hmm.
And that's kind of what this autofill that we're going to talk about today is that we can do. And so they will specify what data is required to qualify for these level 1, level 2, and level 3 transactions. And if we fulfill that, then they will say, fine, instead of charging the base 2.55% interchange rate, we're going to charge you only 1.7%. So it's almost a full percent off that can be saved in these B2B transactions if you provide this extra information. So can you tell me, and again, I'm pop quizzing you this morning, right? Can
Right.
you tell me what level 1, 2, and 3 are, and if they're, and what difference there is between those?
Absolutely. Well, I will say, just from a very high level, I think it just goes to what you were talking about with the additional information. So, basically the level one is going to be less detail. Level two is more than that. Level three is all of the level one and level two plus some more, that basically is de-risking the sort of profile of that purchaser when they go to do that transaction. And this is just generally something that mechanically may tend toward being an afterthought, with a lot of e-commerce platforms and a lot of payment hub systems. They're not necessarily focusing on that, but if it's possible to make it really easy, to sort of flip a switch and turn it on and say, now everything is level three where we can get the data, there's going to
Right.
be a pretty substantial savings over time. But is that, I'll let you outline it more.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I want you to give it at the high level, right? And then I'm going to come in, and if there's any details I know, which I may not know a lot more than you do on this, I'll fill it in. So level 1 would be the traditional. I go to Target, I swipe my credit card, or I go to Target online, I sign up for an account. That's going to qualify a level 1 transaction. Target's going to have the very least amount of data on me about that transaction. They're only going to qualify at level 1, and they're going to end up paying the bank the highest rate, which usually they're rate plus the interchange plus the discount rate, all the other stuff ends up being like 2.55%. So those transactions end up being usually about 3.5% to the vendor, which would be Target in this case. So Target ends up paying a higher rate, what they call the effective rate. So with all their transaction fees plus the discount rate they're paying their merchant provider and the rate they're paying the card issuer, it ends up being about 3.5 to 4% per transaction. So it gets quite costly. So if they could
Yeah.
lower that almost a full percent, that would be quite a big savings to them. Level 2 usually requires about 8 fields, and then level 3 usually requires about 22 to 24 fields. Can you tell me, Chris, and you may not know the answer to this one, who dictates which fields are required for level 2, level 3, and how is it determined what fields are required?
I'm guessing it's the bank or the card, like Visa, but I'm not 100%. Is it the bank
Yeah, it's the
itself?
processor. Yes, yeah,
Okay.
it's the
Yeah.
processor. So in this case, like the one we just completed 2 weeks ago, we did TSYS first, right? TSYS is one of the
Yep.
big players. So there's TISA and Visa, and there's a bunch of the different processors, CyberSource, and each one of them have their own spec. Each one of them are almost identical, but they may call the fields a little different. One might call it line item details, and one might call it a commodity code. One might call it a zip, merchant zip code, and one might call it a ship from zip code, whatever, right? So they have their own names. So when we fill out that data and send it up, we have to make sure that we follow the processor specs. So when we set up Payment Hub for a client, based on the gateway that we're hooking up to and which processor they're using, when we auto fill in that level 2, level 3 data, it has to be different. So we have to have a different spec in Payment Hub per processor. And there's at least one of the processors, I know Chase Payment Tech is one of the more difficult ones. If we send up level 2 or level 3 data by default, every other card, we can just turn on level 2, level 3, and we will always send the data. We can configure the gateway to pass through that data to the processor. And if it gets to the processor, so let's say, for example, I have 2 credit cards, right? I've got the Clarity corporate card and I've got Ron's personal Visa. If I pay
Right.
with Ron's personal Visa and our solution auto-filled all 22 fields to TSYS and it's sent up, TSYS would look at the card and say, oh, that's a personal card. That's extraneous data. Thanks for the data, but it still qualifies as a level 1. Chase
Right.
Payment
Okay.
Tech, unfortunately, if I do that, Chase says, oh, that's a personal card. You sent me too much data, and it declines the transaction and shuts the transaction down. So we have to do some additional custom development with a bin lookup where we will send up ahead of time to Chase, look up the bin number, which is the first 6 digits of the card, determine the type of card it is, determine whether it would qualify for level 1, 2, or 3, and then send the appropriate amount of data to match the card so that the transaction won't get declined. So in this particular case, it's the processors that decide what the data is. Now, this is one that I know you know, and you can help kind of explain to the audience. Where does the data come from? Because we have 2 pieces of data, right? So we've got the integration. So talk about that and then talk about what the new Payment Hub solution can do to fill that out. So let's say, for example, I come to you, you sell me Payment Hub, we connect up with my NetSuite, and now I, as the merchant, want to qualify for level 2, level 3. Walk me through how you, Clarity, and how our technology provides that data. Let's say it's TSYS for the processor
Mhm.
today.
Yeah. So basically, a lot of the challenge typically for real businesses that are running and scaling and growing is they don't have time to sit there and manually sort of like append or complete data, data entry for these type of things. So um, depending on the business logic for the level 2, level 3, and sort of what the requirements are, like you said this earlier, Ron, they need us to have attempted to find the data to qualify. And additionally, for our business, we may already have a lot of this data, or for your business, for this NetSuite scenario, you may already
Yep.
have a lot of the data for the customer inside of NetSuite. So we can sort of hydrate that level 2, level 3 information, just kind of fill it all out from that NetSuite integration, and where it's not available, use default data. But we did, in fact, physically attempt, and we can even show transaction logs internally to back this up, that we attempted to push the data to that level 2, level 3 from that customer record or associated, entities within NetSuite. Possibly it's a contact record as well. There may be some custom fields that you guys have that are specific to your business that help us determine what type of industry that company is in, for example, et cetera, et cetera. And so we basically set up the integration so that it uses best practice default fields to pull in. And if the data isn't there, we use default values that are applicable for your business in that particular processor, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And there is a spec that each of the processors provide that says this data, if it's not available, here is a default value that's acceptable. So a lot of times when we're filling out this, some people call it bogus or fake data, it's actually acceptable data. So for example, this is one that happens all the time. Let's say I'm a church and I'm doing a $50,000 transaction, but I have a business card. So the church actually has a credit card and I'm doing that. Well, one of the requirements to qualify for level 3 is we have to report up how much sales tax is recorded. Now, if we didn't collect any sales tax and we record a 0, Visa will actually kick it back. Visa says, no, you have to, and I think it's Visa or one of them. It's either one of them says you have to report at least 1 to 8%. One says it has to be 3 to 22%. There's different specs for each one of the processors. Now, regardless, let's say I make that $50,000 payment and there was no sales tax collected. However, in Payment Hub, we can go into our default app settings, and I'm going to bring it up on the screen right here. So you can see it right here. I've got an app setting, and I'm going to circle the value right here. We can actually go in, and in the top one there, it says total tax collected. So I'm going to go in there, and you can see that it's got a 0.1. So I reported in my default settings that we're going to collect 10% sales tax. Below that, the first one says national tax, which is the federal tax, and then the next one says state tax. You can see they both have a 0.5. So basically what I'm saying is in these individual fields that I send up this data, whatever that is, a $50,000, I'm going to say that $5,000 of total tax was collected, and then 50% of that was collected for federal tax, 50% of that, or $2,500, was collected for state tax. Those are in separate fields. Those are reported up as well to qualify for level 3. So even though it was a sales tax free transaction, it can qualify for level 3 because we filled out the fields. And that is acceptable data that Visa, TSYS, any of the other specs have said. So we've got an app setting per merchant. So when we set this up for you, like Chris said, the first attempt is to grab viable data from the ERP integration, right? So we integrate with all the ERPs, all the CRMs. We will attempt to fill out the real data about the company and about the transaction and about the details of the transaction as applicable. And as Chris also said, and any other data that we don't have, we'll just autofill it in from the settings that I've shown you on the screen here. And that's the app settings that we set up and configure per merchant so that it can be accurate as far as the ship from zip code and the commodity, the types of products that they ship, the amount of sales tax that we would report that would normally be collected by that entity. Now, the last thing we'll cover, and then we'll be done, is that there are a handful of gateways. I think Paytrace and NMI, they already do this, but there's about 250 different gateways out there. All the other gateways that don't do this, this is how they can qualify for level 2, level 3. They can use a solution like Payment Hub, and Payment Hub can be set up to automatically be configured for each processor. So was there any last thing that you wanted to enter on there? If not, let's go ahead and close out today's call.
No, just feel free to reach out to us for a complimentary review if you have a specific project you think this might apply to. And we appreciate you watching, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.
All right. Thanks for joining us. Bye for now.
Thanks again. Bye for now.